Today is the third in our series of messages on Elisha. This isn't like a soap opera where you need to be here for every single message. They don't build on each other. They're all separate stories in the life of Elisha. This week we consider the word empty. I think there are times that we've all felt empty. We look at our bank account, empty. We look at how much gas we have in our tank, empty. We look at our relationships, we find them empty. But sometimes we don't really see what's going on because we're so focused on the wrong things. I was thinking about my life this week and all the things in my life going on. I give myself as an example because I don't think that I'm too far from what the average is for people when it comes to what weeks are like. Of course, I do some different things, so what I do might be a little different than you, but I can imagine your week might be like mine. The week started out with me focused on bunk beds. You may have heard me say this a few months ago, there were so many things I didn't get done in the spring because of so many events that happened over the spring and summer. And one of those was working on bunk beds. So I've been spending a lot of time working on bunk beds, and that's been filling up a part of my life. And as I've worked on those bunk beds each night when I get home from work, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. In the midst of that, I had preparation for today, preparation for the future ministry of our church, and that took time. So I was working on that. Over on Tuesday night, I was at Financial Peace University. So we had Financial Peace University. Then, this Friday and Saturday, I had a rehearsal for a wedding on Friday, and then the wedding yesterday. So then it's time to add in my own personal devotion. Well, I really can't add anymore because it's overflowing. When it all's said and done, my life is so full, and all of our lives are so full. I use myself as an example only because it represents what I hear from so many people. Doesn't matter if you're in school, doesn't matter if you're in the business world, doesn't matter if you're a homemaker. We fill our lives with so much that our cup is set to overflow, and yet we feel empty. When our lives are so full of activity, it's hard to see that we have a problem. It's hard to understand why we feel empty when life seems so full. And many times before we can see the problem, we need to be emptied out first. There's a reason for that. Empty declares our need. We see this in the story of the widow's olive oil in 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant my husband is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. Now his creditors are coming to take my 2 boys as his slave." From this passage, we don't know the widow's name. Many commentators think that this widow was actually the widow of the prophet Obadiah. If she was, we all have a right to feel sorry for her, because if you were the wife of a prophet, you had a hard life. Because what did prophets do? They prophesied. How much money can you make prophesying, telling what the future is? Unless you're working for a king, which some prophets did, you weren't going to make a lot of money. And Obadiah was supporting other prophets in addition to his own life. So if this was a widow of Obadiah, she didn't have a lot of money, because it is not profitable to prophesy. There's just no way. You're not going to be able to get anywhere in life financially if you are married to somebody who is a prophet. And so the problem here was that she was married to somebody who financially wasn't really doing a whole lot to be able to support, because his focus was where? On God and God alone. Being a prophet in the Old Testament was not a financially stable way to make a life. In fact, it wasn't really a healthy way to lead a life if you consider staying alive important, because prophets were always on the run. They were always in trouble because what they prophesied about tended to be against the rulers of that age. So he died, and he left her a widow. And apparently Obadiah left her something else as well, a debt. A rather large debt she could not repay. She tells Elisha that the creditor is going to take her 2 boys as slaves for repayment. And the widow was most likely in her 30s, and there's almost nothing else that she can do. Women were second-class citizens. They couldn't just go out and get a job. She's come to the end of her rope. She sees her life falling apart around her, and she goes to the only one she believes can help her. She believes she is empty, and empty declares our need. Almost 2 decades ago, I was in a financial mess myself. It was not completely of my own doing, but every day I had a pile of bills in my mailbox, a huge pile of bills. I had an answering machine full of messages from some not very nice people. It was a humiliating experience to be in that situation. But I learned something very important. Needs and wants are two very, very different things. When my bank account was empty, I learned what I truly needed. Things like food, things like heat, the simple things of life. But I also learned the things that I didn't need. Empty declares our need. It wasn't hard to separate the needs from the wants. It was funny, things that I thought that I needed, I really didn't. Cable TV, that movie on Friday night, the coffee at my favorite restaurant every morning. Empty declares our need. Priorities change when we see them in the light of empty. The widow's debt wasn't one of her own making, but she recognized that she had to go to a higher power to help her out. Empty declares our need. But empty also does something else for it. Empty highlights what we have. Now you're probably thinking, wait a second here, you said empty, so if you're empty, you don't have anything. But a lot of times, empty is what we see, but not what God sees. In 2 Kings 4, verse 2, Elijah replied to her, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" And she responded, "Your servant has nothing there at all. I have nothing." The widow says she has nothing. She is empty. And that is exactly how I felt when I was in my financial crisis. If you had asked me how much I had, I would have said the words of the widow, "Your servant has nothing." I could only see what I didn't have. I couldn't see what I did have. And what I did have, I considered to be nothing. My understanding of what I did have was colored by what I was missing, which in my mind was everything. I felt empty, but I felt like I had nothing. The widow felt the same way. She only saw what she didn't have. She didn't have the money to pay her debt and save her sons. But then she says something very interesting. You notice there's a comma at the end. The verse hasn't ended. She says something very interesting at the end of this verse. She says, "Your servant has nothing at all." But then she completes the sentence saying, "except a small jar of olive oil." Remember, she said, "I have nothing." But then she has a small jar of olive oil. Well, guess what? Empty highlights what we have. In the midst of my financial difficulties, it was very hard for me to see what I had. But there was something valuable that I owned. It's just I didn't see it as such. My sister asked me to provide music for her wedding reception because she knew I had a huge music library. I love music of all kinds, and I had this big music library. And she said, "Would you do the music for my wedding because you have everything that I want?" Now, I wouldn't call what I did DJing, and I didn't call it that at the time, but that's basically what it was. And as a result of that evening, I was asked to provide music at several more weddings. My music library ended up being my olive oil. That's exactly what it was. When I said I was empty, I really wasn't. There was something valuable right under my nose. But before my sister's wedding, I didn't see my music library as valuable. I didn't see it as something that could be used to get me out of my financial situation. The widow almost offhandedly said, "But I have this little jar of olive oil." She didn't recognize it for what it was. To her, she was empty. But what little she did have became obvious when she didn't have anything else. What little I had became obvious when I didn't have anything else. Empty highlights what we have. But empty also allows God to fill us. In 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 3 to 7, Elisha says, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side." She left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debt. You and your sons can live on what is left." It's jar filling time. So that we're clear, God told the widow to send her sons around to ask for empty jars. They brought them back, and then she began filling them with her original olive oil, the original container that she had. She took that to fill the empty jars. And she kept filling them, and kept filling them, and kept filling them from that same little jar, that single jar of olive oil that she had. One by one, she filled them all. What she saw as empty, God took and made something more. And after that first wedding and the response I received, I remember staring at my music library, and it suddenly dawned on me, I could make money playing music. Suddenly a new revenue stream was born. The music library had value. My olive oil kept filling up my bank account and continues to this day. When we surrender ourselves to God, it's like the doors are thrown open. God can go to work. God can make things happen. But we have to be empty first. Yesterday was a wonderful day. I got the chance to officiate the wedding of two friends of mine. And as a part of my homily in the service, I said these words: "Marriage is a covenant of love in which both husband and wife empty themselves of their own concerns. In that covenant, they take upon themselves the concerns of each other in loving each other." There's that word empty again. Both husband and wife empty themselves of their own concerns. When we're empty, we can fill ourselves with something else. In the case of marriage, the husband and wife trade their own concerns for the concerns of the other. If we're full of ourselves, we don't have time for anything else. If we're full of ourselves, we have a major problem on our hands. Look at the widow. What happened when all of the jars were full? The oil stopped flowing. Empty allows God to fill us. We miss out on the blessings when we don't empty ourselves. God can't fill our jars if we don't make room. If our jars are overflowing, how can God add anything else? And what God has for us is so much more than anything we can imagine. I want my cup filled with God's blessings. This morning I have an admission to make. I like to drive with a full tank of gas. Now you're probably thinking, well, so do I. Well, mine goes a little beyond just driving with a full tank of gas. I don't like my gas tank to run down very far. I've noticed something, and you may have noticed this too. When you go to the gas station and your tank is way down low, you're 3/4 of tank empty, it costs a lot more to fill your tank than it does if you're only at a quarter tank. Well, I have a little problem with this because I don't like to even get down to half a tank. I just have to top it off all the time. Of course, this means many more trips to the gas station, but they're quick trips. But I do have to go to the gas station much more often. Here's the problem. Every once in a while, my gas station offers a coupon discount on a single gas purchase. It is sometimes 10 cents, sometimes 15 cents. It's been as much as 20 cents off a gallon. But it is for one purchase of gas. You can't take the coupon and use it twice. It can only be used once. In other words, in order to get the maximum discount for that coupon, what does my gas tank have to be? Empty. The biggest benefit is having an empty tank. And as you can imagine, this causes huge psychological problems for me. I love saving money. I love a discount on gas. But how can I let my gas tank drop below half full? The last time this happened was just about a month ago. I received 15 cents off a gallon, nice little coupon, and it meant that I had to let my gas level keep dropping. And it was driving me crazy. I would go past gas stations looking longingly at them as I looked at my tank and thinking, oh, I can't wait any longer. I got to do this. I waited till the day the coupon expired, and I was nervous because I thought, if I get this low, something's going to go wrong. I got down to 3/4 of tank low, and I filled them and was able to use the coupon. It was awful. I barely got through it. But I couldn't experience the discount. I couldn't experience the blessing unless my gas tank was almost empty. And that's what Elijah is telling us in the Bible through the widow. In order to receive a blessing from God, we need to empty ourselves. When we empty ourselves, we can know whatever we have left is God's. And when God decides to use what we have, we can know for sure that the blessing is from God and has nothing to do with us. There's a wonderful passage in 2 Corinthians that puts it this way. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. The jars of clay referred to in this passage, that's us. That's our bodies. We are the clay pots. We are the dirt houses. That's when God can use us. God is looking for a few empty jars. When we empty ourselves of all the things that stand in the way of surrendering to God, empty declares our need. Empty highlights what we have. And empty allows God to fill us. But the fact is, we live our lives, most of the time, full. We don't have time to be emptied out. We don't have time to let God in. And so we wonder why we're feeling empty, and the fact is that God isn't there to fill us. When we are weak, God is there. When we're thirsty, He's our living water. When our life feels like it's falling off the foundation, we need to bind ourselves to the rock. When we think we have nothing, God will show us something far beyond anything we can imagine. He will bless it. He will increase it. And when we think we don't have what we need, God will show us that He is all we need.